Hello, all, and welcome. We are back with our series, Coaching for Transformation, and joining us, as always, is Susan Minaya, COO and Chief Learning Strategist with Minaya Learning Global Solutions, whom is also an executive coach. On this episode, we dive into being a developmental leader. Stay tuned to learn more. Susan, welcome back.
Hey, Dario. Good to be back.
All right. So let's dive in as usual. Now, Susan, today we're talking about developmental leadership. And I think this is one of those areas where leaders think they're doing it, right? But may not be doing it as effectively as they could.
I agree, and I'd frame it this way. Most leaders think development is something they do for others, right? But developmental leadership is really about two things: how you develop others and how you develop yourself.
So straight away, this is more than a skill set.
Yeah, definitely. And we go back to that word, it's a discipline.
Okay, well, speaking of the discipline, right? How do you define a developmental leader?
Developmental leader is someone who sees every interaction as an opportunity for growth. Not just did we get the result, but who is this person becoming through the experience? And that includes you as the leader.
So development is happening in both directions.
Exactly. And that's where most leaders miss it.
All right, well, let's go there then. Because you're saying development starts with the leader, right?
It absolutely does. Developmental leaders are constantly asking themselves, where am I over functioning? Where am I stepping in too quickly? Where am I limiting someone else's growth because of my own habits that I have?
Wow, yeah, that requires a lot of self-awareness.
It does. And also humility. Because leaders have a tendency to think they're too busy to take that class, or I don't really need to take that class. Sometimes when it comes for really focusing on things like coaching that are developmental, where 360 assessments would be very beneficial for them, they might not really want to do that, because here's where they could see the gap between how they think about themselves and others' perceptions of how their effectiveness is. And when in fact getting that input is going to be a great validator and also an indicator of the leader's area for developmental focus. So a lot of them shy away from that. And it's not good to navel gaze really and just think I'm great. And I don't think leaders do that, but it's also being willing to be vulnerable and put yourself out there to get that kind of feedback. So that input is so important, because sometimes the lack of growth isn't because of your team or your team members. It's your need to be right or to be fast or to be seen as the expert. And that gets in the way. And a lot of times leaders don't really always recognize that they're doing that. And this is where something like a 360 assessment would really be helpful for them.
That's definitely a powerful reframe.
Yes, and that's where it gets real. So when you step in too quickly, you solve too fast, or you carry too much yourself, you don't help in the moment. You create a long-term dependency on you as the leader. And I think we talked about that in an earlier podcast that we have. And most leaders don't recognize that they're doing it.
So how does a leader start developing themselves more intentionally then?
This is where I love getting practical. You know, Dario, there are 3 areas leaders need to focus on. You know how I feel about 3s, but first off is the coaching mindset. So you have to shift from, I need to have the answers, to my role is to help others think for themselves, right? And that includes truly believing coaching is critical to your success as a leader. And your job is to help people find their own answers. So that's really essential. The second one is building a coaching skill set. And this is where most leaders are really quite underdeveloped. You need to build capability in asking open-ended questions, listening beyond the surface of what the employee is telling you, delivering feedback that actually shifts their behavior. Because if you don't build these skills, your default goes right back to telling and fixing. Right? And third, they have to really focus on the coaching process. So developmental leaders are very intentional. They set clear focus for conversations. They let others think first before they jump in. And they also ensure there's ownership and follow through on the work that they're doing.
So this goes back to exactly what you mentioned in the beginning. This is not a mindset, it's a discipline.
Exactly. And I'd say this, you can't build a developmental culture if you're not developing yourself.
Well, let's talk about strengths then, right?
Okay.
Because that seems to be central to all of this.
It is. And this is another place where leaders often kind of go in a different direction. They focus on fixing weaknesses. A lot of times I see this. And developmental leadership really focuses on building strengths, because strengths are where energy lives in the people that are reporting to you, because they enjoy the work that they're doing. So the will is there, and learning accelerates for them because they're interested in knowing more, because they like that topic, right? And performance becomes sustainable because they continue to amp up their capabilities, and that advances them, and not just themselves, but everyone on the team. So that's really a very positive engine for productivity and development for your team.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, it's not ignoring weaknesses. It's prioritizing differently.
Exactly. And you don't ignore gaps for sure. When we say focus on your strengths, we're not really talking about never mind if they're not doing something right. You definitely have to address that, but you don't build a strategy around them. Instead, you ask, where does this person naturally excel? So, how do I give them more opportunities in that space? And how do I stretch that into greater impact? Because when people operate in their strengths, they're significantly more engaged in the
Mm.
job and far more effective in their roles.
Yeah, I would say that feels like a more sustainable way to lead.
It is. And it's also more human, right? You're not trying to turn people into something that they're not. You're helping them become more of who they already are at their best.
So, if you had to leave the leaders with one takeaway, what would that be?
I think being a developmental leader is not about doing more, it's about shifting how you show up, moving from I'm the expert to I'm the coach, from I'm going to fix it to I'm going to allow you to fix it and figure out how to fix it, and from proving yourself to actually developing your own self, right? And the things that you're doing. Be humble enough to recognize that there's always opportunity for growth. Because in the end, your leadership is not defined by what you accomplish, but by who grows because of you.
No. Well, amazing, Susan. Thank you so much for sharing about being a developmental leader.
My pleasure.
Now, this wraps up this episode, and we will be jumping into a new topic for this series on coaching for transformation. So, until next time.
It's been fun.